Or in a more feminine society, there's an idea that we are all here to care for each other in our community. It's a more nurturing type of orientation, and it really doesn't have too much to do with being male or female specifically, because in some cultures that are classified as more feminine in this model, it's not that they're all female. It's the males also believe that it's an important value that we all work together to make the community or the group or all of us or even themselves more cared for. The power orientation being, how is it that we achieve success? Is it about caring for others, or is it more Machiavellian, where it's survival of the fittest type of orientation? The next is the uncertainty or avoidance index. Some cultures do not like surprise. They don't like to experience public humiliation. They avoid at all costs, even allowing something like that to happen, to the point where they plan every conceivable thing in advance to avoid that type of thing. And if there is some sort of public embarrassment, it's highly shameful. Where other cultures are a little more comfortable with the uncertainty, and if there is some sort of public embarrassment due to whatever, a lack of preparation or a personal gaffe, cultural gaffe, that it could be sort of shrugged off or even laughed off, and or not everything is planned for, because there's some expectation that you just never know what can happen, and we'll just go with it when it does. So you then also would see more formal societies, more rule-driven societies being a lot less comfortable with uncertainty. Societies that tend to be more individualistic tend to be more comfortable with uncertainty. Another thing to look at is the long-term or short-term orientation of the culture or the group of people you are targeting. So this is a little confusing. You have to think about this in a sort of past and future orientation. Some societies have a very long view of what will happen if they engage in certain behavior or plans. They are looking at the long-term effects of it. They're also going back in history to look at what are the traditions within their society, and they are trying to hold on to those values that they have embedded in their core beliefs about what is right and wrong. But they are always very future-oriented as well, to the point where they may question some long-held traditional values if they feel the impact of that would be negative. A short-term orientation society is also looking at the past, and they're also saying, well, we've always done things this way, and that's the way we're going to continue to do them, even if it means there's going to be long-term negative impact to it. They would still do it because they don't have a long-term orientation. They're not worried about the long-term future impact of that. So you would imagine that in a short-term orientation society, they're more reactive and they're less planful about future 3, 4, 5 years in advance or more. And the final dimension is the indulgent versus restraint dimension, and this is the degree to which people are free to express themselves, their natural human desires, and a lot of this has to do with enjoyment and having fun. Again, you would see on the high end of the scale where indulgence is more encouraged and or associated with being a good thing. That would tend to be more individualistic societies, where societies that have more of a restraint stance tend to be more rules driven, and also there could even be more of a collectivist idea in some of these places, not purely so, but the idea there is that any individual acting in such a way that they are just appeasing their own individual desires might bring shame to the group, the family, whatever that might be. So they also tend to be people and or cultures that are more invested in societal traditions. And a warning to all marketers: it is not a good thing in the field of marketing to hold on to ethnocentric beliefs. Ethnocentrism is when a person engages in evaluating or judging another culture as good or bad based on their own preconceptions that originated within the values and norms of their own culture. Again, you need to understand how people of the culture you are targeting as a consumer group, how they were socialized, what is right and wrong for them and why, and you have to withhold your own judgment based off of your own perceptions of your own cultural norms, because what you're going to end up doing is either crafting a marketing message that is trying to change the values of the targeted consumer group, and or you're going to craft a message that is offensive to this group. The cultural competency continuum at the bottom of this slide shows a range from the left being the most insensitive, ethnocentric stance you can take all the way to the right, which is the range of ethno-relative dispositions you can adopt. To the far left, denial is where you actively deny that any other way of doing things could possibly be good, to the extent that you engage in activities in which you need to make sure you let other people know that the way you do things is right and the way they do things is wrong. Defensive posture is similar to that. It's a little less harsh in that you are just going to say, this is the right because I believe this is right and you're wrong, and that's just all we're going to say. Minimization might be where you understand that there are different ways of believing and thinking, but you still feel that yours is right or more superior. Moving into the more ethno-relative stances, acceptance might be that you also see that there's different ways of viewing things. You do believe that the way that you believe is the correct way to believe, but you also accept that there's a different way to believe that is not necessarily bad. Adaptation and integration really move towards the continuum of which you start to accept that there are many different ways to think about things, and there are different constructs that bring us to our norms, and that none of them are necessarily good or bad. It's just they are what they are. And then with integration, it isn't simply just they are what they are. You are able to very readily see how those societal norms are constructed. So it's more of a meta level understanding. And again, I would assert to you that in marketing, that is a place that is worthy of you occupying. Whether you believe these things in your own personal life or not is not relevant to whatever it is you're doing for international marketing, because again, if your goal is to reach your target consumer market, treating them as if they are somehow inferior because they believe a certain way is never going to go over well, as you could imagine. And lastly, the chapter does cover several other considerations you want to be thinking about that have sociocultural implications. And the list here is long. Very briefly, low context versus high context cultures has to do with the level to which things can be inferred. In high context cultures, many of the things below are nonverbal ways of communicating and or given societal norms that don't have to be articulated, that it's expected that people can infer meaning. In a low context culture, people will not come to understand something unless it's specifically articulated. Therefore, they don't act in inferring things so much. This can create business problems in when there's a mix or a cultural mashup here, because in a high context culture, if they feel that everything has to be explained and articulated, there's some breakdown in relational trust that you just don't get it. Haptics has to do with how acceptable it is to actually physically touch one another and or what that communicates. In Western society or in American society, we tend to be less touchy and or want to avoid that beyond a handshake. In other cultures, your business relationship or even your marketing campaign, if someone has their arm around somebody else, it definitely signifies relational trust and a continuation or desire to continue that relationship. Proxemics have to do with how closely people stand to each other, or at what distance a person's personal space is being invaded. Different cultures have very different types of levels for this. It can also relate to how products are situated in relation to others, like products around a kitchen sink, and or even in merchandising, certain products should never be in view of other products, such as men and women's undergarments in certain cultures should never be within eyesight of each other. Language, nonverbal communication, and body language and paralanguage are all different ways we communicate. Language, obviously, how we use language, whether it be sort of a high language or more vernacular, has in different cultures different norms around it. Body language, how you move, what your eyes are doing, what your hands are doing, all can convey significant meaning to others without you saying anything. That's a type of nonverbal communication. Paralanguage is something we hear while people are speaking, and this is really about the pitch and tone and speed in which we talk, our intonations and inflections. There's different norms around that within each culture. Social stratification has to do with who's in charge, who makes the decisions. Is it a strong man in power is the most respected thing, and no decisions that person makes should be questioned publicly? Or is it a more egalitarian society where there is sort of the idea that we work together as a group and every voice is just as important as anybody else? Class consciousness also somewhat relates to social stratification, in that in many societies there is an idea of a wealthy or elite group that could be based off of family lineage, or even status and power of certain people and the legacy that they have. Other systems that have been prevalent throughout the history of the world often do break people down into social classes. The caste system in India is one example. The institution of slavery in the United States and other Western countries was another example, in which we created very specific classes of people. Even though these things are outlawed, the caste system in India is no longer legal, and neither is slavery in the United States, but these systems have legacies in which societal institutions still have a certain response to people within these historical class groups, and many people who are within those groups have a certain identity that is still a legacy of those systems. Status and power have a very important role in marketing. Marketers that are savvy will look at who has status and power. This could be a YouTube celebrity, or even somebody from a well-known historical family. Could be a wealthy person, but they are considered influencers, and if they have respect and clout within their society, many marketers will look at their behaviors to help craft messages that will associate those people with their brand or product to drive sales. Formality is the level at which conversations and interactions take place in more traditional societies or rules-driven society. They tend to be more formal. There are customs and niceties that are expected to be followed, where in more informal societies there are less of that. And finally, chronemics is about what are people's prevailing attitudes around time. Is it considered extremely rude to show up to a meeting late, or go off agenda for a while, or lengthen a meeting beyond what's acceptable or not? The cultural norms around that vary widely. Again, every chapter in the book, as you know, ends with several different questions to consider when you are doing an integrated marketing plan. Not to answer every question, but to look at patterns that emerge and key in on things that are very significant that will help you drive your plan towards your stated objectives. And always remember, I am here for you. Please call me or message me on Canvas if you need anything. Thank you.